The challenge for IT leaders is first to be ready. Be ready for the deluge of challenges that are going to come your way from business leaders when they finally get what's happening here. And the second thing, starting right now, is you need to be more approachable. You need to start making it easy for them to come to you, because in the very near future, they will absolutely have to come. If you're a business leader in this audience, it's time you started thinking and hanging around with IT people. My name is Damian Costello. I'm the managing partner at Decode Innovation. We work with organizations on innovation and strategy services, and I myself am a specialist in disruptive dynamics. I've done this for more years than I care to remember. I've done it in nearly all sectors, and I've done it all over the world. And when I started doing this, sectors that required my help in facing disruptions, they were like the buses. Every couple of years, there was another one coming along, and I was involved in lots of them. But this time around, things are very different. This time around, it's like no disruption that I've seen before. This is the perfect storm, because all sectors are facing this same disruption at the same time. This digitization of everything will lead to an unprecedented explosion of value, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about that. I'll make the case for that value before we're finished here today. The takeaways I'd like you to get from today are that business needs to align with IT. That's the shift that's occurring. Rather than IT aligning with business, business now needs to align with IT. You will need to be more prepared than they are, and you will be. Right? Disruption favors the prepared, and the winners are those who will be data-driven and agile. There is no question about that. And there's a load of people here today that are going to talk to you about that. I'm going to talk to you about disruption. So what is disruption? How does it work? And why is it important right now? Well, disruption is a force of nature, one that tends to turn the strengths of the old dominant orthodoxy on their heads. Those who are efficient and agile will survive, but those who are informed and agile will thrive. This is a solenodon. These animals lived with the dinosaurs, and they're still alive today. They exist in Cuba and the Dominican Republic. They're quite a ferocious little beast. They're one of the few mammals that are venomous. So just because they're small doesn't mean that they don't have weapons. And that's part of, I think, the learning in disruption. So how does disruption work? Well, Mark Twain tells us that history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And in my world, it rhymes with S. And we're all familiar with the adoption bell curve. Anybody involved in technology is. Well, the S curve is the cumulative of that. It's a classic life cycle curve. Starts off slow. There's a period of building a foundation. Then there's an inflection point, and there's a period of stable growth. Then there's another inflection point, and you slide into a period of diminishing returns before inevitable death. And we all know, we all can feel the fact that this is something that's accelerating. What took decades in the past takes much shorter now. And this one will be even faster. The thing about progress is the progress is evolutionary. It's not linear. You get a progression of different generations interrupted by discontinuous jumps. It's these discontinuous jumps that we describe as disruption. And the mother and father of all disruptions is what we describe as a paradigm shift. And that's what we're facing right now. We know quite a bit about these disruptions. The first real commentary on it is from Clayton Christensen, who talks about the innovator's dilemma. The innovator's dilemma states that disruption can only occur when the old orthodoxy is at its peak. And the trap in that is that the first of a new generation performs less well than the last most mature of the old generation, but it has aspects that will redefine the future. So the trap in the innovator's dilemma is if you're successful in what you do, in disruptive times you have to go backwards to go forwards, and that's not something they teach you in business school. If you do persist, if you do insist in holding on to the old orthodoxy, you will go the way of the typewriter manufacturers. or the travel agents. And nobody wants to be there. Another thing about a disruption is the first of a new generation comes disguised as the old generation. Okay, we see this over and over. There's a lot of reasons for it, which I won't go into right now, but we see this over and over. The first generation of digital music came on plastic discs with a hole in them, a familiar format. Right? But it was never about the plastic discs. It was about the data, as we now know, and the fact that if you have enough of it, you can do incredible things. This man realized it. He, and I was involved in digital right management at the time, he had pretty much told the music industry what he was doing. It was no secret that Apple was coming after the music industry, but there wasn't a thing they could do about it because that paradigm shift was inevitable. Digital was always going to trump analog in that scenario, and the same thing is happening today. So one way of looking at this is that the old ways are apples, and that the new generation are oranges. And the trick is to realize that the first of the new generation is an orange disguised as an apple. So why is this important to digital? Well, the first wave of digital mobile communications looked very much like the last of the portable communications. But when you look at it from this distance, it is a very different story. And the reason I bring this up is, I remember growing up, we had a phone in the house from before I was born. My father was the local electrician, so the phone was used purely for his business. Right? My parents paid line rental. They paid device rental. They never used the thing. Now, if you look at any of your own homes and your own situations, the infrastructure is probably, on a whole, similar. But the pyramid is now inverted, and it is inverted because there's a lot more devices, but much more importantly, there are masses of services that we don't even count. We don't even think how much we're spending on subscription services and digital communications of all sorts. Right? That inversion of the pyramid is the digital dividend. That's the orange that we're after in this space. That explosion of value that your businesses will sooner or later realize that they're either on track for or they're going the way of the typewriter manufacturers. And once you move to digital, the reason this works is that digital allows you to defy the laws of physics. You have tens of thousands of infrastructural nodes built by somebody else, paid for by somebody else. There's hundreds of thousands of services, millions of devices paid for by somebody else. The individuals pay for the devices more often than not. And you can have then billions of transactions. Every day in this country, there are billions of digital transactions. This is what we call the cloud. This here is the data that travels on the cloud and the devices that we use to handle that data. The cloud is global. It's infinite because it's constantly being built, right? And it makes your businesses infinitely scalable. The data itself, as you can imagine, is big. It's huge. There's a huge amount to it. But big data means big business. And therein lies your orange. It is that big business, that explosion of business that will make us all comfortable in the future. So what do you need to be prepared for? The inherent efficiencies of the internet that led to the demise of all of these industries and the emergence of these companies that nobody had heard of a decade before is now spilling into the real world through the Internet of Things and the complete digitization of everything. And why is this important? Because of who's involved in it. All of the serious players are in this space. And that is a good indication that there's something important going on here. So in my world, I believe that this new digital world order is a paradigm shift on a par with a combination of the advent of electricity and the automobile, right? Which were the two pillars of, for the last 120, 150 years, the two pillars of the economic world order that we live in today. I believe that this digital new world order is no less inevitable but it's also probably no less scary. Fear does not impede progress for long. So what Rebecca's going to talk to you about is not a luxury. It's not something that's out there in the future, right? All of these things that John mentioned, all of these things have to be dealt with right now, because very quickly they will be dealt with. The whole thing will have moved on, and you'll have been left behind. Another lesson we learned from electricity is, before electricity, you had all of these appliances. Right? In the first wave of electricity, you had an analog for each of these appliances. There was the electric cooker and the electric light bulb, the electric kettle. And then a line got drawn at some stage. And a whole wave of new products and services emerged that wasn't possible prior to electricity. If you think about the early internet, there's all these organizations that built the internet. And then there's these organizations that came afterwards that did things that were impossible before the internet emerged. But these are the people who enjoyed the digital dividend. These are the people, when a number of years ago I was working in telecoms, they were described as the over-the-tops. They were the squatters on the infrastructure. In these organizations, there's no distinction between IT leadership and business leadership. It is all business leadership. And in the very near future, there will be no distinction between the businesses that you work for and any of these businesses. Now, innovation, we have a thing called the rule of three. Right? It says that the first wave of something is A, the second wave is B, and the third wave is a combination of the two. It's the A plus B. What you get in this scenario is, way back in time, you had affordable and simple transport. You had a horse and a hand-built cart. Then there was a period where you had handcrafted automobiles that only the elite could access. And then you had affordable and complex. You had the mass-produced automobile. In this rule of three, there is what we describe as the Henry Ford moment. When someone comes along and changes the dynamic from hand-built to mass-produced. And I would argue that at the moment, this digital revolution is the Henry Ford moment for so many industries, the industries that got left behind in the first wave of the internet. And to support that case, I'm going to talk a little bit about Jeremy Rifkin. Does anybody in the audience, do people know who Jeremy Rifkin is? Very few people know who Jeremy Rifkin is. He wrote a book called The Third Industrial Revolution. And the thing that's important about that is the fact that he talks about an industrial revolution. I know my friends in manufacturing describe it as the fourth industrial revolution, and it has been mentioned today as part of this story. It doesn't matter what your count is. The issue is this paradigm shift we're talking about is a full and proper industrial revolution. And the reason to heed Jeremy Rifkin, who's not that well respected in his own country, he's an American. The reason to heed him is he was one of the first people Angela Merkel called when she took power. He is one of the most influential economists in Europe. And he tells us that an industrial revolution emerges when an energy revolution, a communications revolution, a transport revolution, when they all coincide. And when this happens, seismic social change is never far behind. The dynamic in the new revolution is the decentralization of everything. So in the first industrial revolution, by Rifkin's count, was a command and control model, which was dictated by your birthright, by the aristocracy, by the elites. In the second industrial revolution, it was still command and control autocracy, but now it was wealth and ambition that was driving it. And wealth and ambition is smarter than inbred aristocracy. So we've led to a situation where the gap between rich and poor in this world right now is greater than it ever was. And that's unsustainable. And it will demand a change. And the change that will come is a shift to a network model. And maybe just that statement is enough to see why I argue that business needs to follow IT rather than the other way around. Because nobody understands the network model more than IT people. This idea of first being decentralized and then being completely distributed. Rifkin describes it as the collaborative commons. He tells us that this is a new communications and energy matrix that will create millions of jobs and thousands of businesses to allow us to flourish into the 21st century. And in my way of thinking, that's one heck of an orange. So your value lies not in your knowledge of their game. Your value lies in your knowledge of this new playing field. They don't realize how big this is all going to get. They don't realize how much analysis and insights they will need. They don't realize what type of data they will need you to handle. But you do. You know it'll be bigger than anything they can imagine. You know it'll be more complicated than any of today's predictions. You know that individual firms are no match for the universal investment in the cloud infrastructure. But that cloud is the only way that any organization is going to keep up with the dynamic demand. Right? Without the collaboration of all of these organizations that are working on improving and growing the cloud, nobody's going to be able to keep up with the changes that are going to happen. And you know that you need to start this right now, today. So to wrap this up, remember that businesses need to urgently align with IT. That you must be more prepared than they are. That disruption favors those that are prepared. And you must make data and agility second nature to them if they're going to thrive. You may have to sell them the apple that they say they want today, but you have to build them the orange that they're going to need tomorrow. Right? So my advice to the IT people in this room is go and disrupt. Go disrupt everything. Right? Be ferocious. IT people, I believe that your time has come. Thank you.